A determined police chief, a city on the brink of collapse, and a fight against corruption that runs deeper than anyone could imagine. When Maya uncovers a web of lies involving her own department, she's forced to risk everything. Can she expose the truth, or will powerful enemies tear her apart? The price of justice is higher than she ever thought. Are you ready to discover the shocking twists? Watch to find out. Maya Harris adjusted her uniform as she stepped out of the patrol car, her boots clicking against the concrete of Jackson's most notorious neighborhood. She had seen the streets, heard the stories, but tonight was different. Tonight, she wasn't just any officer walking the beat. She was the first black woman to hold the title of police chief in Jackson, Mississippi. The weight of her position felt heavier tonight, but her resolve was unshakable. The dim lights cast long shadows across the street, the sounds of distant sirens blending into the steady hum of the city. Maya's eyes scanned the area, ever alert, but she was also acutely aware of the distrust she was facing from the community and her own officers. Some had embraced her leadership, others viewed her presence as a threat, but she had been fighting for this position her entire life, not just to serve, but to change the system from within. Tonight, that fight would begin in a way she couldn't have predicted. A car screeched to a halt on the corner, and Maya felt a shift in the air. Her instincts, honed over years of service, screamed that something wasn't right. The car door slammed, and a tall figure stepped out. Ethan King, a young officer Maya knew all too well. His reputation for racial bias was well known within the department, but tonight she had no choice but to confront him head-on. "Evening, Officer King," Maya said, her voice steady, though she could feel her pulse quicken. She had faced hostile situations before, but this time, it was different. This time, it wasn't just about doing her job. It was about proving she belonged here. Ethan's eyes flicked up to meet hers, and his expression hardened instantly. He had no idea who he was facing, and that was about to cost him. "What's a woman like you doing out here?" Ethan sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "This is no place for you, Chief." Maya's lips tightened, but she remained calm. "I'm here to do my job, and you're obstructing that." Ethan scoffed and took a step closer, clearly intent on asserting his dominance. Maya felt the tension rise, the air thick with unspoken animosity. The power dynamic was clear to him, and he wasn't about to back down. "You think because you wear that badge you can talk to me like that? I don't take orders from you, Chief," he spat. He stepped closer again, a menacing grin spreading across his face. Maya's hand instinctively moved to her sidearm, but she didn't draw it. She wasn't here to escalate the situation, but Ethan didn't care. He reached into his jacket, pulling out a cigarette, and flicked it into his mouth. "You think you can come in here and change things?" he muttered, lighting the cigarette with an arrogant flick of his wrist. "You're just another person trying to control things you don't understand." Maya stood still, watching him. She had faced threats before, but this time, something about Ethan felt different. The way his hand shook as he brought the lit cigarette close to her face. He was testing her. He wanted to see if she would back down. Maya refused to move, her gaze locked on his. She had dealt with racism in every form for years, but this time, she wasn't going to let it intimidate her. "You're wrong," she said, her voice cool and steady. "This city is mine to protect, whether you like it or not." Ethan took another long drag from his cigarette, eyes narrowing. "You're just a joke, Harris," he growled, before pressing the cigarette to her cheek, burning her skin. Maya winced slightly, but she didn't flinch, not in the slightest. The searing pain was nothing compared to the fury she felt inside, but she kept her composure. "You have no idea who you're messing with," Maya said quietly, her words laced with cold fury. For a moment there was silence. Ethan stood back, his smirk fading as Maya's words sank in. He hadn't realized the weight of what he'd just done. He had no idea who she truly was. Maya didn't give him the satisfaction of reacting. She simply looked at him, her eyes hardening with resolve. "You will regret this," she said, turning on her heel and walking away. She could feel the heat of the burn on her face, but she didn't let it show. Every step she took was a reminder that the battle had just begun. Ethan might think he had power, but he had no idea what real power looked like. As Maya walked down the street, she heard the faint sound of his footsteps following behind her. But she didn't look back. Her mission was clear now. This was just the beginning. She was going to make sure that no one, especially someone like Ethan, would ever forget her name. Maya didn't flinch as the burn mark on her cheek began to throb. The heat from Ethan's cigarette still lingered, but it was nothing compared to the fire building inside her. She could feel her pulse quicken, the anger bubbling just beneath the surface. But she kept walking, one step after another, her focus unbroken. The incident with Ethan had left a mark on her, but not in the way he thought. It wasn't about the physical burn. It was about the message he had tried to send. That he, and people like him, thought they could control the narrative. Maya's response had been clear. She wasn't just going to let this slide. She wasn't going to be another victim of a broken system. As she reached her car, she pulled out her phone and dialed a number she knew by heart. Jasmine Clark, investigative journalist, and the one person who might just understand the fight Maya was about to begin. Jasmine, Maya's voice was tight but steady. I need your help. It's time to expose the truth. Jasmine's voice crackled through the line, and Maya could hear the concern in her tone. What happened? Are you okay? I'm fine, but Ethan King, the officer who burned me with a cigarette, he's part of something much bigger than just a few bad apples. I need to take him down, but it's going to take more than just my word. There was a pause on the other end, followed by Jasmine's calm reply. I'm in. You've got my full support. We'll get to the bottom of this. Together. Maya hung up, her mind racing. This wasn't just about Ethan anymore. It was about the system that allowed him and others like him to act with impunity. It was about exposing the corruption within the police department that kept them safe, untouchable. Maya knew that whatever she uncovered would make waves, but this time she wouldn't let the waves drown her. The next morning, Maya arrived at her office earlier than usual. She sat at her desk, staring at the stack of files in front of her. The police department's internal files, the reports she had been handed down, were filled with stories of officers like Ethan. Officers with a history of violence and racial prejudice, but always protected by the system. Maya had seen the names, the dates, and the broken promises made by the department to cover up their actions. She was sickened, but not surprised. It was the same old story. She opened the file on Ethan. His record was spotless on paper. At least, that's what the department wanted everyone to believe. But Maya knew better. She had seen firsthand the way he spoke to people, how he treated civilians, how he operated with unchecked power. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Come in, Maya called, her voice firm, the authority that came with her position evident. The door opened, and Officer Henry Foster, one of the few officers Maya trusted, stepped in. He was an older man, reliable, and one of the few who supported her in her leadership. But even Henry had his reservations about Maya's leadership. She could feel the weight of that skepticism in the air whenever he was around. Chief, he began, his voice cautious, you've got to be careful with this. You know that Ethan's father has connections. This could get ugly for you, for all of us. Maya looked at Henry, her gaze hard. I didn't ask for permission, Henry. This is bigger than just Ethan. We have a responsibility to the people of Jackson, not to the good old boys club that's been running this city for decades. Henry sighed, shaking his head. I get that, Maya, but going after someone like Ethan's family? That's not just a risk, that's a war, and I don't know if we're ready for that. Maya stood up, the burn on her face still fresh, but it was nothing compared to the fire in her chest. I don't have the luxury of waiting until we're ready, Henry. This is happening now. Either we do something, or we let them win. Henry hesitated, then nodded slowly. You know I've got your back, Chief. Just be careful. Maya walked around her desk, placing a hand on his shoulder. I will. Thanks for believing in me. As Maya got to work on the paperwork for the investigation, her phone buzzed. It was Jasmine. Got something. Jasmine's voice was clipped. There's a trail. Ethan's got more skeletons in his closet than I thought. I need you to meet me. We've got a lot to unpack. Maya's heart raced. This was it. The moment she had been waiting for. She grabbed her coat, her resolve hardening with each step. This fight was no longer just about proving a point. It was about dismantling a system that had been in place for far too long. When Maya arrived at the coffee shop where Jasmine had asked to meet, she saw her friend sitting in the back, her laptop open, a stack of papers in front of her. The weight of what Jasmine had found was evident in her expression. I've been digging, Jasmine said, gesturing to the screen. There's a lot we didn't know. Ethan's father? He's been involved in more than just covering up his son's actions. We've got ties to political corruption, money laundering, and illegal arms deals. And it all traces back to the department. Maya sat down, her breath catching in her throat. This wasn't just about Ethan. This was about a web of corruption that had been thriving for years. This is bigger than we thought, Maya whispered, her mind reeling. We're going to bring it all down, Jasmine, together. Maya sat in her office, staring at the stack of files Jasmine had handed her. The weight of the documents was crushing. The secrets they held were more dangerous than she could have imagined. She flicked through page after page, each one revealing a deeper level of corruption within the department. The names, the dates, the cover-ups, they were all connected to Ethan King, and worse, his father, Richard King, had his hand in everything. Ethan's record had been wiped clean by the department, but Jasmine's research had uncovered a dark truth. Maya hadn't just been targeted by a rogue officer, she was up against a system that had been silently, systematically abusing its power for years. Ethan wasn't just a racist officer, he was a pawn in a much larger game, a game controlled by those who thought they could manipulate both the law and politics to serve their own interests. As Maya read through the files, the more she felt the bile rise in her throat. Ethan wasn't the only one. Other officers, prominent in the department, had their names linked to shady deals, illegal operations, and cover-ups. The more she uncovered, the more overwhelming it became. The corruption was not just in the actions of a few bad apples, it was institutional. The entire department was rotten to its core, and every part of it was shielded by those at the top. A sudden knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in!" Maya called, her voice steady, though she was starting to feel the pressure of the investigation weighing down on her. The door creaked open, and Jasmine Clark stepped inside. Her eyes were tired but determined. She had spent the last few days digging through every corner of the case, and Maya knew she had found something. Something big. "I found something," Jasmine said, her voice low, as if the very words she was about to speak were dangerous. Maya looked up, her heart racing. "What is it?" Jasmine placed a file on Maya's desk, her hands shaking slightly. "It's worse than we thought. Ethan's father has been funding illegal operations, weapons smuggling, illegal arms deals, you name it. He's been using his son as a cover for years. But that's not all. The department's been helping him launder the money. Every time Ethan screws up, it gets swept under the rug, but it's a bigger web than just him." Maya's mind raced. Richard King, a man with enough political power to manipulate anyone, had been using the department as his personal shield. He had corrupted everything. The laws, the officers, the entire system. "But it's not just Ethan," Jasmine continued, leaning in closer. "There are other officers, good officers, who've been helping cover for him. They've been bribed, blackmailed, and manipulated into doing things they shouldn't. Some of them even think they're doing the right thing by protecting him, not knowing the full extent of what they're involved in." Maya felt her stomach twist. These were her colleagues, the people she was supposed to trust, and they were all compromised. She could feel the weight of it, the enormity of the task ahead of her. It wasn't just about getting rid of Ethan anymore. It was about dismantling an entire corrupt system. "How do we stop it?" Maya asked, her voice steady despite the storm raging in her chest. "We expose them," Jasmine replied, her voice hard with resolve. "We go public. We leak the documents. We force their hand." Maya paused, the silence between them thick with tension. Going public meant more than just bringing Ethan and his father to justice. It meant risking her career, her safety, and her reputation. The department would fight back, the public would turn against her, and the people she trusted would turn their backs. But Maya knew she had no other choice. She had come too far, and the truth had to be exposed. There was no turning back now. "Let's do it," Maya said, her voice firm. "Prepare the documents and get the media involved. We're not just going after Ethan. We're going after everything. This city deserves the truth." Later that night, Maya found herself back at home, staring at the reflection of her own tired face in the bathroom mirror. The burn on her cheek still stung, but it was the weight of what was to come that truly weighed on her. This wasn't just about one officer. This was about an entire system built on corruption, a system that had held her back her entire life, and one that she had to tear down, piece by piece. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind her. She turned to see Michael, her husband, standing in the doorway, his expression a mixture of concern and exhaustion. He had been quiet about her work lately, understanding but distant. Tonight, though, he stepped forward, taking her hand in his. "You're going to do this, aren't you?" Michael asked quietly, his voice filled with a mix of worry and admiration. Maya didn't say anything at first, just stared at him, wondering how much longer they could hold on to what little they had left. The strain of the investigation was taking a toll on both of them, and the secrets that had been kept between them were now harder to ignore. "I have to," Maya finally said, her voice barely a whisper. "I can't walk away from this." Michael nodded, his thumb brushing over the back of her hand. "I know. Just be careful. I can't lose you too." The weight of his words hung in the air, and for a moment Maya allowed herself to feel the fear that had been building inside of her. But then she hardened her resolve. There was too much at stake now. She wasn't going to stop until the truth came out. Maya's office door slammed behind her, the echo reverberating through the cold, sterile hallway. She was shaking, her heart racing, but her face remained stoic. She had just left an emergency meeting with the deputy chief, a meeting that had confirmed her worst fears. The walls were closing in on her, and everyone knew it. Ethan's influence had spread deeper into the department than Maya had realized. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about everyone who had protected him, everyone who had allowed this poison to infect the department. Her investigation had uncovered more than just a rogue officer. She was staring down an entire network of corruption that no one, not even her closest allies, could escape. Her phone buzzed on the desk, the screen lighting up with Jasmine's name. Maya picked it up with trembling hands. Maya! Jasmine's voice was sharp, urgent. I've been digging, and there's something big here. Something you need to know. Maya's breath caught in her throat. What is it? Jasmine hesitated. It's Richard King. He's not just funding illegal arms deals, he's directly involved in some of the city's largest construction contracts. And guess who's been getting kickbacks from the projects? A whole lot of officers. We're talking high-ranking ones, Maya. People you might even trust. Maya's stomach twisted. The deeper this went, the more she felt the weight of betrayal from all sides. Ethan had been just the beginning. Now she was up against the very foundation of the department, and the stakes had never been higher. Get me the details, Maya said, her voice ice-cold despite the storm raging inside her. And fast! Jasmine's voice was firm. I'll send it over, but you need to be careful. The people who are involved in this are dangerous, Maya. They won't hesitate to protect their interests. Maya hung up and sat back in her chair, the realization hitting her harder than the physical burn from the cigarette. She had crossed a line, and now there was no turning back. The next morning, Maya stood in front of the bathroom mirror, splashing cold water on her face. She could feel the weight of the day pressing down on her. The pressure was almost unbearable. The investigation, her marriage, her position as police chief, it was all threatening to collapse around her. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her from her thoughts. Michael. He hadn't been home when she woke up this morning. He hadn't spoken much in the past few days. She knew he was worried. About her. About everything. But she couldn't back down now. Maya. His voice was low and hesitant when she picked up. I think we need to talk. Maya sighed, wiping her face with a towel. Not now, Michael. There's too much going on. I can't afford to let my guard down. I'm not talking about work, Michael said softly. I'm talking about us, about what this is doing to us. Her chest tightened. She didn't want to have this conversation now. She didn't want to face the reality of how much this fight was tearing their relationship apart. But she knew she couldn't avoid it forever. I'll be home later, Maya said, her voice strained. We'll talk then. She ended the call and stared at herself in the mirror. She wasn't ready to confront the toll this was taking on her marriage, but she couldn't afford to ignore it either. There was too much at stake. At the police station, things were getting more tense by the hour. Maya had never felt more isolated. The officers who had once been her allies were now eyeing her with suspicion. Whispers followed her wherever she went. She knew Ethan's supporters were circling, waiting for the right moment to strike. She walked into the break room to find Officer Henry Foster, the one man she trusted most in the department. But even he was looking at her with a mix of concern and apprehension. Chief, he greeted her, his voice low. We need to talk. Maya nodded, sitting down across from him. She could see the fear in his eyes. Henry had always been a man of principle, but now even he seemed torn. What's going on, Henry? Maya asked, her voice steady, but her heart heavy. He hesitated. There's talk, Maya. People are saying you've gone too far. They're worried about the fallout if this thing goes public, and some of them... His voice trailed off, clearly struggling with what to say next. Maya leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. What are they saying? Some of them think you're putting the whole department at risk, that you're stirring up a hornet's nest that could take us all down. They're not wrong, Maya. You've got powerful people on your tail now. Maya clenched her fists. And what are you going to do, Henry? Turn your back on me too? Henry flinched at her words. No, I'm with you. But I'm also scared, Maya. I've got a family, a life here. I can't just throw everything away. Maya took a deep breath, her own fears rising, but she shoved them down. She needed to stay strong. For the city, for herself. We can't back down now, Henry. This is bigger than us. He nodded slowly, his face softening. I know, but you have to be careful. People in this department have more to lose than you realize. As Maya walked out of the break room, her mind whirled with the enormity of the situation. The people she trusted were starting to question her decisions. The walls were closing in faster than she could control. Ethan's father, Richard King, and his network were powerful. They had the resources, the influence, and the will to crush anyone who stood in their way. But Maya wasn't going to back down. She walked straight into her office and locked the door behind her. She didn't have time for doubts, not now. She grabbed the phone and called Jasmine. "We've got to move quickly," Maya said, her voice low and resolute. "I need you to start spreading the word. We can't let them close in on us, not now." "I'm on it, Maya," Jasmine replied. "We'll get this out. You just stay safe." Maya didn't respond. She didn't need to. Jasmine understood. The fight for justice had started, and there was no turning back now. Maya sat at the kitchen table, the house still and silent around her. The usual hum of everyday life felt muted, as if the world outside her home had stopped spinning, leaving her suspended in a moment of disbelief. Her fingers drummed absently on the table, a rhythmic sound that contrasted with the chaos swirling in her mind. The documents Jasmine had handed her were spread out before her, but she couldn't bring herself to look at them. They were heavy with implications, not just for the department, but for her entire family. The corruption in the police force wasn't just a threat to her career anymore. It was a threat to everything she'd built, and it was now making its way home, into her life, into her marriage. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. Michael. She hadn't heard from him much lately. The strain was evident in the way they had been avoiding each other, the distance between them growing, unspoken. But now the tension felt unbearable. "Maya," his voice came through, soft and tired. "We need to talk." Maya closed her eyes for a moment. She had known this conversation was coming, but she wasn't prepared for it. Not like this. Not now, when everything was crumbling around her. "I know," Maya replied, her voice tight. "I've been trying to figure out how to fix this." Michael was silent on the other end, the weight of his words hanging heavy in the air. "It's not just the department, Maya, it's us. I can feel the walls closing in on me, on both of us. You've been consumed by this fight, and I don't know how much longer I can just stand by and watch." Maya's chest tightened. "I didn't ask for this," she whispered, her eyes welling with tears. "But I can't back down. Not now." "That's the problem," Michael's voice cracked slightly. "You can't stop. But I'm afraid we're losing everything. Your fight, it's tearing us apart. The secrets, the lies. They're not just about the department. They're about us. I can't pretend anymore, Maya. I don't know if I can keep doing this." Maya was silent. The words, though not a surprise, hit her like a blow to the gut. This wasn't just about righting the wrongs of the city anymore. It was about saving the one thing that mattered most, her family. But how could she walk away from this fight? The system had been broken for so long. If she didn't stand up, who would? "I know you're scared," Maya said softly, wiping a tear from her cheek. "But I'm scared too. This fight is bigger than both of us. It's bigger than just me." Michael sighed deeply. "I don't know what else I can do to help you, Maya. I love you. But if you keep going down this road, I'm afraid I'll lose you. I'm already losing you, and I don't know how much more I can take." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Maya could hear her own breath, shaky and uneven, but she couldn't answer him. She didn't know how to fix this, didn't know how to fix what was breaking between them. "Maybe I should just go." Michael's voice was barely above a whisper, his words like a cold slap. "Maybe you need to do this on your own." "No," Maya said, her voice louder now, desperate. "Please don't leave. Please." But the damage had already been done. The words were out there now, hanging in the space between them. Michael's final painful sigh was the only sound before he hung up. Maya stared at the phone for a long moment, her chest tight, the air in the room suddenly thick with grief. She had always known the fight for justice would come with sacrifices, but she had never imagined this, that her marriage, her foundation, would be one of those sacrifices. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, trying to gather the strength she had left. She knew that the road ahead would only get harder. Her professional life was now intertwined with her personal life in ways that she couldn't untangle. But she also knew that turning back was not an option. She had been fighting this fight for too long. Later that day, as Maya walked into her office, she found Henry Foster waiting for her. His face was grim, and she could tell he had been following the developments closely. He stood up as she entered, his expression serious. "Chief," he began, his voice low, "we need to talk. The pressure is building. I've been hearing things. People are talking, and it's not good. The higher-ups are starting to get involved. They know what you're after." Maya sighed heavily, walking to her desk and sitting down. "I know, but I can't stop now, Henry. We're on the verge of exposing everything. Ethan and his father, this doesn't end with them. We're talking about an entire system that needs to be brought down. Henry's expression softened, but there was worry in his eyes. Maya, I get it, I do. But the more you push, the more they'll push back. You've seen how far they'll go. People are scared. I'm scared. Maya looked up at him, her gaze hardening. We have to keep pushing, Henry. If we don't, they'll just sweep it all under the rug like they've always done. He nodded, but she could see the doubt lingering in his eyes. I'm with you, Chief. But just remember, some of the people who are in this with you might not have your back when it comes down to the wire. The words stung. Maya had always trusted Henry, but now, even he seemed uncertain. She couldn't let fear take over. Not now, not when they were so close. But as the walls closed in around her, she couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling in her gut. This fight was changing everything. Maya sat in her office, staring at the documents scattered across her desk. The weight of them was suffocating. Ethan King's name was on every page, not just as the officer who had burned her face with a cigarette, but as a part of something much darker, something bigger. The evidence Jasmine had uncovered, the financial trails, the illegal activities, they were all pointing to one truth. Richard King, Ethan's father, wasn't just a politician with influence. He was the puppet master pulling the strings of the department, and Maya had just begun to see the full extent of his power. Her phone buzzed. Jasmine. Maya answered quickly, her pulse quickening. We have to move now. Jasmine's voice was urgent. I've got everything. The details, the proof. We can't wait any longer. We need to expose them or we'll lose the chance. Maya stood up, pacing around the room. She had been planning this moment for days, but hearing the finality in Jasmine's voice made the reality of what she was about to do hit harder. Exposing Ethan's father, the corruption within the department, it was no longer just a career decision. It was a life or death gamble. If they were wrong, if this wasn't enough, the fallout would ruin her career, her credibility, and most importantly, her life. I'll call the press, Maya said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. Get everything ready. This ends today. She hung up, her fingers trembling slightly as she reached for the phone again. She needed to make the call. She needed to take that first step, even if it meant walking directly into the fire. Her mind flashed to Michael. She hadn't seen him since their fight, the rift between them growing wider with each passing day. She knew this would push him even further away. He would be angry, confused, maybe even scared. But she had no choice. This wasn't just about them anymore. Maya took a deep breath and dialed. The city needed her. Hours later, Maya stood in front of a group of reporters. The cameras flashed, the microphones were thrust in her face, and the pressure was palpable. She had never felt more exposed, more vulnerable. But this was it. This was the moment she had been working toward, the moment she would finally make her stand. She cleared her throat and looked directly into the eyes of the cameras. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, her voice firm but calm. What you're about to hear is the truth. A truth that has been hidden, buried by corruption and lies for far too long. This city deserves better. The people of Jackson deserve better. The reporters leaned in, scribbling notes, their attention fixed on her. Maya felt the weight of the moment. She wasn't just speaking for herself anymore. She was speaking for everyone who had been silenced by the system. I have uncovered evidence of illegal activities within the Jackson Police Department, she continued. Officers have been complicit in criminal acts, and one of our own, Officer Ethan King, has been involved in the protection and promotion of these illicit activities. But this goes beyond him. This is about a network of corruption, a network led by those in power who believe they are untouchable. She paused, letting her words sink in. The silence in the room was thick, the journalists waiting for the next piece of the puzzle to fall into place. Ethan King's father, Richard King, has been using his political influence to shield not only his son, but also others within this department. I have proof of financial dealings, illegal arms sales, and money laundering connected to him. This department, this city, has been held hostage by people who only care about their own gain, and I won't stand by and let it continue. A murmur rippled through the room. The reporters exchanged looks, questions already forming in their minds. Maya's hands were steady as she reached into her briefcase and pulled out the documents. The smoking gun. She placed them on the podium, pushing them forward for all to see. These documents, she said, contain the evidence of Richard King's involvement in criminal activity. I'm giving them to you. Now the world will know. The press conference ended quickly after that, the reporters swarming around Maya as she walked out of the room. Her heart was pounding in her chest. She had just exposed the most powerful man in the city, and there was no turning back. As the door closed behind her, she felt the weight of what she had done, but she also felt something else, A sense of relief. The truth was out there now, and she had made her stand. Later that evening, Maya sat alone in her office, the weight of the world pressing down on her. She had done it. She had taken the first step toward dismantling the system. But now the real battle began. The retaliation would come. She knew it, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for what was coming next. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. She looked up to see Henry Foster standing in the doorway. His face was unreadable, his eyes filled with concern. "Chief," he said, stepping into the room, "I've seen the news. You did what you had to do. But you need to be careful now. They'll come after you, and they won't stop until they've ruined you." Maya stood up, her jaw clenched. "I know, but I'm not going anywhere. This fight is bigger than just me. I'll take whatever they throw at me." Henry's expression softened, but there was a sadness in his eyes. "You're not alone in this, Maya. I'm with you. But you've got to realize they won't stop at just you. They'll go after everyone you care about." The truth of his words hit her hard. Ethan's father, the political machine that had been running the city for so long, wouldn't just take this lying down. They would fight back. And the people closest to her, Michael, Henry, everyone, would be dragged into it. She took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. "I'm ready for whatever comes next." As the night grew darker, Maya sat in her office, the weight of her decision settling in. The battle was just beginning, and she knew she had to be ready for the first strike that would inevitably come. The weight of the morning was already heavy on Maya's shoulders as she stood in front of the mirror in her office, trying to steady her nerves. It had been days since she exposed the corruption within the police department, and the response had been nothing short of explosive. Headlines screamed her name, and news anchors recited every detail of the documents she had shared with the media. But despite the chaos outside, there was a quiet storm brewing inside her, one that wouldn't calm until she knew the truth had been fully revealed. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts, and she turned to see Jasmine Clark standing in the doorway, her face pale but determined. "We're ready," Jasmine said, her voice steady but tinged with the same unease that Maya felt. "The final report is out. It's all there." Maya's breath caught in her chest. She nodded, motioning for Jasmine to enter. As Jasmine stepped inside and set down a thick stack of documents on Maya's desk, Maya's hands trembled slightly. The truth was about to hit a new level, and she knew that once it was out there would be no going back. Maya took a seat, flipping open the top file. As she scanned through the first few pages, her pulse quickened. Everything they had uncovered, everything they had feared was now coming to light. Not just Ethan King's father, but the entire political structure behind him. The depth of the conspiracy was staggering, implicating several officers, politicians, and high-ranking officials. Each name, each connection, struck like a lightning bolt, shattering the illusion of safety that had once shielded them all. She looked up at Jasmine, her eyes filled with a mix of triumph and dread. "This is it. This is everything." Jasmine nodded grimly. "Yeah, the King family, the bribes, the laundering schemes, it's all connected to the highest levels of power. This is more than just a police department scandal. We've exposed an entire network of corruption that has been manipulating Jackson for decades." Maya leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples as the full weight of what they had uncovered settled in. This wasn't just about exposing a few bad apples. This was about bringing down the very structure that had allowed so much injustice to flourish. It was about dismantling a machine built on greed, lies, and power. But as she let the enormity of the situation sink in, a thought crept into her mind, one that she had been avoiding. What would be the cost? She had already risked so much, but now, with the full truth out there, the stakes had reached a new level. The people who were about to be named in the investigation weren't just powerful, they were dangerous. Before Maya could voice her concerns, her phone rang. The name flashing on the screen made her stomach drop. Michael. She hesitated for a moment, staring at the phone as it vibrated on her desk. She hadn't spoken to him since their last argument. And now, with the investigation reaching its peak, she wasn't sure if she was ready to face him. "Answer it," Jasmine said quietly, reading her expression. "This won't wait." Maya picked up the phone, her heart racing as she put it to her ear. "Michael?" There was a pause on the other end. Then his voice came through, low and filled with tension. "Maya, we need to talk. Now!" Maya's breath caught in her throat. The urgency in his tone sent a chill down her spine. "What's wrong?" "Everything's falling apart," Michael's voice cracked. "I just got a call from someone on the inside. The higher-ups, they're coming for you. They know what you're about to do. And they won't stop at anything to make sure you don't succeed." Maya's grip tightened on the phone. "What do you mean? What's going to happen?" You need to get out of there, Michael said, his voice barely a whisper. They're not going to just fire you, Maya. They're going to destroy you. And they'll use anything, anyone, to make sure you're out of the picture. Your career, your reputation, you won't be able to trust anyone anymore. They'll ruin you. I can't lose you. The finality of his words hit Maya like a punch to the gut. The reality of the danger she was in was clearer than ever before. But this was more than just her career. This was about justice. This was about the truth. I can't leave, Maya said, her voice steady, though every fiber of her being screamed at her to run. I've come this far. I can't back down now. There was a long silence before Michael finally spoke again, his voice filled with resignation. I can't make you leave, Maya, but you need to know. They're coming for you, and I don't know how much longer I can protect you. You're on your own now. The words hit her like a wave. Michael had been her rock, the one person who had always been there. But now even he was pulling away. The fight had cost them everything, and she was now more alone than she had ever been. Before she could respond, the call ended abruptly. Maya sat there, her breath shallow, her thoughts spinning. She had just exposed the most powerful people in Jackson, and now the consequences were crashing down on her. Jasmine stood silently, watching Maya's face as she processed everything. Maya, are you okay? Maya stood up, her expression hardened. I'm fine. We're not done yet. We have to finish this. As the words left her mouth, Maya knew she wasn't just talking about the investigation. She was talking about herself. She had no choice but to finish what she had started, even if it meant facing the fallout alone. That night, as Maya walked into her office, she found herself staring at the same files she had reviewed earlier. The truth was out there now, and there was no going back. The war had just begun. Maya sat at her desk, the weight of the files pressing down on her, but it was the silence in her office that felt most oppressive. The truth had been exposed, and the city was in an uproar. Headlines screamed about the corruption within the department, and the pressure was mounting on every side. But for Maya, the real battle had just begun. Her phone buzzed on the desk, interrupting her thoughts. Henry. She picked up immediately. Chief, Henry's voice was low, cautious. I've been hearing things. There are whispers. Some of the higher-ups are already making moves. They're putting pressure on the mayor, trying to shut this down before it goes any further. Maya gripped the phone tighter, trying to mask the fear creeping up her spine. I'm not backing down, Henry. We can't stop now. Too many people are counting on us. There was a pause before Henry spoke again, his tone tinged with doubt. I'm with you, Maya, but you need to know. They've got allies in places you don't even know about. They're not going to just walk away. Maya took a deep breath. Then it's time to fight back. She hung up, her hands trembling slightly, but her resolve hardening. The exposure had sparked a fire, but it had also brought enemies out of the shadows. The fight for justice wasn't just about proving corruption within the police department. It was about protecting everything she had fought for. Her career, her integrity, and the future of Jackson itself. Later that day, Maya walked into the crowded press room, the bright lights blinding her for a moment. She had made the decision. The city was demanding answers, and she was about to give them one. But this time, the stakes were higher than ever. The truth had caused a storm, but now it was time to turn that storm into a battle they couldn't ignore. Good afternoon, she said, her voice firm and unwavering as she stepped up to the podium. I've come before you today not just as the police chief, but as a leader who is committed to bringing justice to this city. We've uncovered a network of corruption within our police department, and I won't stand idly by while it continues to poison our system. The reporters in the room were on edge, each of them scrambling to capture her every word. Maya felt the tension in the air, but she stood tall, unyielding. She wasn't going to let anyone intimidate her. I'm not here to play politics, she continued, her voice sharp. I'm here to expose the truth. The people of Jackson deserve better than the system that has been running this city for years. And if that means I have to go up against the powerful people who think they're untouchable, then so be it. The room was silent for a moment, the gravity of her words sinking in. She knew the response would be swift. The backlash would be immediate. But this wasn't about her. This was about something much bigger. A reporter raised their hand, and Maya nodded for them to speak. Chief Harris, do you expect any resistance from the department? How do you plan to handle the backlash? Maya didn't hesitate. I've already faced resistance, but I'm not backing down. We are taking immediate action to hold those responsible accountable, and I'm committed to making sure that every officer involved in this corruption is brought to justice. If that means rebuilding the department from the ground up, then that's what we'll do. Another reporter spoke up, their voice skeptical. You're up against some of the most powerful people in the city, including Mayor Lynch. How do you plan to move forward when your own allies might turn against you? Maya's eyes narrowed. I'm not afraid of them. We have the truth on our side, and that's more powerful than any politician or corrupt officer. I didn't take this position to play it safe. I'm here to clean up this city, no matter the cost. She could feel the room buzzing with questions, the reporters eager for more, but she didn't back down. We're just getting started. The people of Jackson have been living in the shadows for too long, and it's time for the truth to see the light of day. You want answers? You'll get them. And if those in power think they can intimidate me, they're mistaken. She stepped away from the podium, the room still electric with the energy of her declaration. The battle had just begun, but Maya was more determined than ever. She had made the first move, and there was no turning back. The fight for justice was now out in the open. Later that evening, Maya stood in front of her apartment window, staring out into the darkened city. The weight of what she had just done was sinking in. The press conference had been a success, but the real war was only starting. She knew the retaliation would come soon. Ethan King, Richard King, and their allies in the department wouldn't just let this slide. Her phone buzzed again. Michael. Maya hesitated before answering. She wasn't sure what he would say after the call earlier, but she couldn't avoid it forever. Maya. Michael's voice was quiet, strained. I heard what you said at the press conference. You really think you can bring them down? Maya closed her eyes for a moment, trying to steady her emotions. I have to, Michael. This is bigger than us. There was a long pause before he spoke again. I don't know if I can keep doing this. The fight you're in, it's consuming you. I don't know if I can lose you to it. Maya's heart sank. Michael, I don't want to lose you. But this is something I have to do. This fight is for everyone who's been hurt by the system. It's for the city. For the future. The silence between them was unbearable. Finally, Michael spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I understand, but be careful, Maya. I don't want to lose you too. Maya fought back tears, her heart heavy. I won't stop, Michael. I can't. She ended the call, her eyes still wet, but the resolve in her chest stronger than ever. The city needed her, and she would not stop fighting until the truth had its day. The tension in the air was palpable as Maya sat at her desk, staring at the documents in front of her. Every page she turned seemed to pull her deeper into the storm that was her life now. The truth was out, the corruption had been exposed, but the price for that truth was becoming clearer with each passing day. The world was closing in on her, and Maya knew she couldn't hold it back any longer. The battle for justice wasn't just professional anymore, it was personal. Her phone buzzed, snapping her from her thoughts. Jasmine. She answered immediately, sensing the urgency in her friend's tone. Maya, you need to know something, Jasmine said quickly. I've been going through the financial records, and there's a lead. Someone on the inside is feeding them information. It's bigger than we thought. Maya's pulse quickened. What do you mean? Who? Jasmine hesitated, then dropped the bombshell. It's Henry. He's been working with them, Maya. I didn't want to believe it, but I've found evidence that he's been passing information along to Richard King's team. The world seemed to stop. Henry, her most trusted ally in the department, the one person she believed in more than anyone else. The sting of betrayal hit her like a freight train, knocking the wind out of her. No, Maya whispered, almost unable to believe the words. No, that's not possible. He's been with me from the start. He helped expose Ethan. He wouldn't... I know, Maya. I didn't want to believe it either, but the evidence is right there. He's been covering his tracks well, but it's all linked back to him. We can't ignore it. Maya leaned back in her chair, her hands shaking. Henry had been her closest ally, the one officer she thought she could trust above all others. But now, with the weight of Jasmine's words hanging heavy in the air, she realized that nothing, no one, was safe. Everyone had a price, even Henry. I need to see everything you've got, Maya said, her voice colder than she intended. Now! The line went silent for a moment, then Jasmine spoke again, quieter this time. Maya, you have to be careful. If Henry's involved in this, that means the entire department could be compromised. They're not just after you now. They're after everyone who's been trying to stop them. I know, Maya replied, her voice steady but filled with an undercurrent of fear. But I can't let this go. Not now. Not when we're so close. That night, Maya couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind spinning with everything that had happened. The betrayal of Henry, the pressure from the mayor, the relentless pushback from the department. She had made a choice when she exposed the truth, but she never anticipated how far the consequences would reach. She had known there would be risks, but she had believed somewhere deep down that the fight for justice would somehow work itself out. Now, with the weight of the city bearing down on her, the battle had become far more dangerous, not just for her, but for everyone she cared about. She got up, unable to shake the feeling that something was about to change. She had been up against corrupt officers, politicians, and now the very people who had stood by her. The walls were closing in, and she was losing her footing. Her phone buzzed again. A text message from Michael. "I know you're still awake. We need to talk." Maya's stomach churned. She hadn't heard from him since their last heated conversation. She was terrified of what he might say, but she knew they had to face it. They had to face everything that was falling apart. She typed back quickly, "I'll be home soon." Maya entered her apartment to find Michael standing by the window, looking out at the city that had become both their battleground and their prison. He turned when he heard her come in, his face a mask of frustration and worry. "I'm done standing by, Maya," he said, his voice low but fierce. "You're playing a game with people who don't care about anything but power. And now, you're dragging me into it." Maya took a deep breath. "I didn't ask for this, but I can't stop now, not when we're so close to ending this." Michael stepped forward, his hands clenched into fists. "You're so close to losing everything, and I can't sit back and watch it happen, not when it's taking everything from us." His words hit Maya hard like a punch to the chest. She'd always known her fight for justice would cost her, but she hadn't anticipated the toll it would take on her marriage. She had been so focused on the truth, on bringing down the corrupt system, that she hadn't stopped to consider the cost to the people she loved most. "I can't back down, Michael," she said, her voice breaking. "This city has been under the thumb of these people for too long. If I don't do this, who will? Who's going to stand up for the people who've been silenced by this system?" Michael's face softened, but there was still fear in his eyes. "I know, Maya. I know what you're doing is important, but this isn't just about the city anymore. It's about us, about our family. I can't lose you to this." Maya felt her chest tighten. She had always believed in their love, but now she wasn't sure if there was anything left to save. The fight for justice had consumed her, and in doing so, it had torn apart everything she had once held dear. "I don't know how to fix this, Michael," she whispered. "I don't know how to make it stop." Michael took a step closer, gently taking her hands in his. "Maybe you don't have to fix it, Maya. Maybe we just need to figure out how to fight this together. Because I can't do this without you." Her eyes filled with tears, but she held his gaze. She wasn't sure where their relationship would go from here, or how they would make it through the mess she had created. But for the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of hope. Maya wasn't sure what the next move would be, but she knew one thing for sure. This was the turning point. The fight for justice had reached its apex, and the consequences were becoming impossible to ignore. It wasn't just about fighting for the truth anymore. It was about choosing what and who she was willing to sacrifice to make it all right. The day had arrived, the moment Maya had been preparing for, the culmination of all the battles fought in the shadows. The truth was now exposed, but the enemies she had made in her pursuit of justice were not going to back down quietly. She knew this was the final showdown. It was no longer about justice for the city, no longer about righting the wrongs within the police department. This was about survival. It was about holding on to the values she had fought for, or losing everything in the process. Her phone buzzed, snapping her from her thoughts. Jasmine. Maya answered it quickly. "We've got a problem." Jasmine's voice was tight, urgent. "They know what we've got. They're coming for you, Maya. It's happening right now." Maya's heart pounded in her chest. She had known the retaliation would come. She had known this fight wouldn't be easy, but hearing it from Jasmine made it real. "What's the plan?" Maya asked, keeping her voice steady despite the adrenaline pumping through her veins. "We've already alerted the press, but we need to move fast. If you're going to take them down, you need to do it now. The mayor's office is already starting to issue statements to discredit you. The media will turn on you if we don't act quickly." Maya took a deep breath, steadying herself. The walls were closing in, but she wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not after everything she had sacrificed. "I'm not running, Jasmine. I'm going to face them head on. I've come too far to let them win." The press conference was called for late that afternoon. Maya stood in front of the podium, the weight of the room's collective gaze pressing down on her. She knew this would be the moment where everything either fell apart or came together. She could see the reporters, the photographers, the few allies who had stuck by her side in the back of the room. They were all watching, waiting for the final word. Her mind raced as the room settled into an eerie silence. Maya cleared her throat and stepped forward. "I stand before you today not as a police chief, but as a woman who is fighting for the truth, for justice. I've exposed a corruption that runs so deep within our system that it has affected every level of law enforcement in Jackson. She paused, letting the weight of her words hang in the air. She could feel the eyes of the city on her, watching her every move. She had no room for mistakes now. The people behind this corruption, she continued, her voice unwavering, believe they are untouchable. They thought they could silence me, intimidate me, destroy me, but I'm still standing here, and I'm not going anywhere. A murmur of surprise rippled through the room, but Maya held her ground. This was it. She had to make the truth undeniable. I have proof, she said, her voice rising with conviction, and I will not let these people continue to control this city. I will not let them ruin the lives of the people who trust us to protect them. Maya glanced toward the back of the room, where a few of her most trusted allies stood, watching closely. She could see the tension on their faces, the fear of what might happen next. But Maya had no fear left. She had already made her choice. The doors to the room swung open, and suddenly the air in the room shifted. Ethan King stepped in, flanked by several other officers who had supported him through the corruption. His eyes locked onto Maya's with a cold, calculating gaze. The entire room went still as he made his way to the front, a smug smirk on his face. Chief Harris, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, I see you've decided to air all of our dirty laundry for the world to see. You think this is over? You think you can take us down just like that? Maya didn't flinch. She had seen Ethan like this before, full of arrogance, convinced that his family's power could shield him from the consequences of his actions. But today, he was wrong. This is just the beginning, Ethan, Maya said coldly. You and your father's empire is crumbling. You can't hide from the truth anymore. Ethan's expression shifted, his jaw tightening. You have no idea what you've started, do you? This won't end well for you. Maybe, Maya said, stepping closer to him, but it's ending for you now. The room was tense, the reporters watching the exchange unfold, waiting for something, anything, to happen. The stakes had never been higher. Maya's heart raced, but her mind was clear. She had to finish this. A figure appeared in the doorway. Richard King, the politician who had orchestrated it all, the man pulling the strings behind the corruption, had finally entered the room. His presence sent a ripple through the crowd. The room fell silent as he stood in the doorway, his cold eyes scanning the room before settling on Maya. You think you can expose me, Chief Harris? Richard King's voice was low, menacing. You think you can take down everything I've worked for? I've built this city, and you think you're the one who's going to bring it all down? Maya met his gaze, unflinching. It's already happening. The people know the truth now, and the truth has a way of tearing down even the strongest walls. Richard King sneered. You've made a mistake, Maya. A big one. You think the truth will save you? You're nothing compared to the power I have. You won't walk out of here. You're wrong, Maya said, her voice steady but filled with defiance. I've already won. You just don't know it yet. The room was filled with an almost palpable tension. Maya had thrown the gauntlet down, and now the final strike had been made. It wasn't just about exposing the corruption anymore. It was about showing the city that no one, not even the most powerful men, could escape the truth forever. As the reporters filed out, murmuring among themselves, Maya's heart still pounded in her chest. The battle wasn't over yet. She knew the fight for justice had just taken its most dangerous turn. But for the first time in a long time, she felt the weight of her choices settle into place. The war for justice had just begun, and this was only the beginning of the end. Maya stared at the city skyline through her office window, her mind heavy with the weight of the past few weeks. The truth had come out, the battle had been fought, and for a brief moment she had tasted victory. But victory was never as sweet as it seemed. The cost of exposing the corruption within the police department, the power structure, and the King family had left her standing alone in the aftermath. Her allies had dwindled, and her relationship with Michael was on the edge of collapse. Yet in the wake of the chaos, Maya knew one thing. If she didn't rebuild, if she didn't restore the trust of the people who needed her the most, all of it would have been for nothing. She wasn't sure where to start. There were still whispers in the department. Some of the officers still loyal to Ethan and his father, others unsure of where they stood now. Maya had been thrust into a role where not just the law, but her very ability to lead was under constant scrutiny. She had exposed the system's dark underbelly, but the pieces that had been torn apart still needed to be put back together. The city, the police force, her colleagues, they were all waiting for her to take the next step, but the weight of that expectation felt like an anchor. Her phone buzzed, and she snapped out of her reverie. Henry. She hesitated before answering. Maya. His voice was tentative, unsure, as if he was walking on thin ice. I, I've been thinking about everything. The department, the people. We've got a long road ahead, but we can start by fixing what's broken. If you're willing to lead us, I'll follow. I owe you that much. Maya swallowed hard, feeling a lump form in her throat. She had been betrayed, yes, but in Henry's voice she could hear the uncertainty and the willingness to make things right. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment she had hoped for when everything had seemed lost. Thank you, Henry, she replied, her voice steady, but we have a lot of work to do. The truth is just the beginning. Now we have to rebuild, not just the department, but the trust of the people we've sworn to protect. That afternoon, Maya stood in front of the department's officers, the room filled with a palpable tension. She had called this meeting not just for those who were left loyal to her, but for the ones still unsure, the ones still reeling from the fallout. She had been through enough herself to know how hard it was to rebuild when everything felt broken. But this was her chance, a chance to show them that change could come, that justice didn't end with exposure, but began with the hard work of restoration. Listen up, Maya's voice rang out through the room, steady and clear. We've been through hell. The truth has come to light, and now we're standing at a crossroads. Some of you have made mistakes. Some of you have been complicit in a system that was broken from the start. But we can't move forward unless we all decide to rebuild. Together. There were murmurs around the room, some of the officers shifting uncomfortably, while others nodded solemnly. Maya could feel the weight of their eyes on her, waiting for her to tell them what would come next. I'm not here to make excuses for anyone, she continued. What happened, what Ethan King and his father did, was inexcusable. But the truth is, it didn't happen in a vacuum. We let it happen. We allowed this corruption to fester because we didn't speak up. We didn't demand change. But that ends now. I'm committed to making this department what it was meant to be, a force for good. But it's not just my fight. It's all of ours. If you're with me, I need to hear it. Maya scanned the room, her eyes locking with those who had been loyal to her from the beginning. But there were others, faces she had trusted that now turned away. A few didn't make eye contact. She could feel the unease, the hesitation. This wasn't just about cleansing the department of corruption. It was about convincing those who had been complicit to now stand for what was right. One officer, a young woman Maya had worked with closely, stood up. Chief, she said, her voice shaky but determined. I wasn't sure if I could keep going with all this, but you're right. We've let this go on for too long. We need to start over. We need to fix this, and I'm with you. Maya nodded, feeling a flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Slowly others stood, some with hesitations, some with resolve. It was far from unanimous, but it was a sign that the tide was beginning to turn. After the meeting, Maya stood by her office window, looking out over the city. The room behind her had emptied, but the weight of what she had just done lingered in the air. This wasn't the victory she had imagined. It wasn't the end of the fight, but it was a beginning. And for the first time in weeks, Maya felt a spark of optimism. Her phone buzzed again. Michael? She hesitated for a moment before answering, still unsure where they stood after everything that had happened. Maya, Michael's voice was soft, cautious. I've been thinking a lot about what you've done, about what's next. I know it's not easy, but I think we can find a way through this. Together. Maya closed her eyes, relief washing over her. I don't know what I would have done without you, Michael. I've been so focused on fixing everything outside of us, I forgot about us. That's okay, he said quietly. We'll rebuild, just like you're doing with the department. But we have to do it together. Maya felt a lump in her throat. The road ahead would be long, and it wouldn't be easy. But for the first time, it felt like they might just be able to find their way through it. Both her city and her marriage. She wasn't alone anymore. We will, Maya whispered. We will rebuild, together. Maya stood in the quiet of her office, the weight of the morning pressing on her. The press had turned their attention to the ongoing investigation. The fallout from the corruption scandal was reverberating through the entire city, and everyone seemed to have an opinion. The outpouring of support was mixed with fierce criticism, but Maya knew that this wasn't just about public perception anymore. The cost of justice was being felt on a deeply personal level. She reached for the stack of papers in front of her, the final report. After weeks of investigation, phone calls, and sleepless nights, this was it. The truth had come to light, and the public had seen it. But the real cost of it wasn't something anyone outside her office could understand. It wasn't the media frenzy or the demands for accountability. It was the personal toll. The betrayal of Henry had been the first blow, but the damage to her relationships with her colleagues, the strain it had put on her marriage with Michael, and the weight of being the face of this revolution against corruption was beginning to show. She had thought justice would come with a sense of triumph. But as she looked at the pile of evidence, the lives ruined, the reputations destroyed, she felt nothing but exhaustion. Her phone buzzed again. Michael. Hey, he said, his voice tired but warm. I know we haven't talked much lately, but I need to ask you something. Maya sat back in her chair, her fingers trembling slightly as she pressed the phone to her ear. What is it? How long are we going to keep doing this? Michael asked, the question hanging between them. I've been thinking about it, about everything. You've been so focused on fixing the department, the city, but what about us? What about our future? Maya's chest tightened. The weight of everything had been consuming her, and she hadn't realized how much she had been neglecting him. He was right. She had been pushing forward, fighting battles, taking on more and more, but she hadn't stopped to ask herself the most important question. Was it all worth it? She didn't answer right away, her mind swirling. I don't know anymore, Michael. Everything's become so tangled. I can't fix everything, and I don't know what's left for me. For us. There was a long pause before Michael spoke again, his voice softer now, as if understanding the depth of her internal battle. You're doing what you think is right, and I get that. But at what cost, Maya? You're breaking down. You're not just fighting for justice anymore. You're fighting to save everyone else, and you're losing yourself in the process. Maya closed her eyes, feeling the sting of his words. She had become so focused on the cause that she had ignored the most important parts of her life. She had ignored him. And now, the cost of justice wasn't just the lives of corrupt officers or politicians. It was her own peace of mind, her family, and the person she had become in the process. Maybe I've already lost myself, she said quietly, the weight of the realization settling in. Later that day, Maya made her way to the courthouse steps, the familiar sound of camera shutters clicking around her. The city had been watching her every move since the truth had been revealed, and now as the first court cases involving Ethan King and Richard King were about to begin, the weight of it all felt unbearable. The promises she had made, the lives she had disrupted, it was all coming to fruition, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like the world was closing in around her. As she reached the podium, she paused for a moment, taking in the faces of the people gathered around. The press, the bystanders, the protesters, all waiting for her next words. This was the moment she had spent months preparing for. But now, in front of the world, she wasn't sure what to say. Today marks a new chapter for this city, Maya began, her voice steady, though she could feel the nerves creeping into her stomach. For too long, the people of Jackson have lived under a system of corruption and lies, but that ends now. The truth has been uncovered, and it is time for us to rebuild what has been broken. She took a breath, letting her words sink in. The people were listening, but Maya knew they weren't just listening for justice. They were waiting for her to lead them forward, to show them a way out of the darkness. But this isn't just about exposing corruption, Maya continued, her voice growing firmer. It's about creating a system where justice is truly served, where the people can trust those who are supposed to protect them. It's about rebuilding what we've lost, and it's not going to be easy. It's going to take time, but we can do it. Together. As she finished speaking, Maya felt a weight lift off her shoulders, though the burden of what lay ahead still pressed heavily on her heart. The battle wasn't over, but at least she had made a decision. She had taken a step forward, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like the right one. That evening, Maya returned home, her eyes weary but determined. Michael was waiting for her, his expression soft but full of concern. "How'd it go?" he asked quietly. Maya didn't answer right away. She simply walked over to him, resting her head against his shoulder. For a long moment, they stood in silence, the weight of everything hanging between them. "You were right," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been so focused on this fight, I forgot about us, but I'm done with that now. We'll rebuild together. I don't know how long it's going to take, but I know we can do it." Michael pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her in a quiet embrace. "We will, but this time we're doing it together." The cost of justice had been high, but perhaps, just maybe, it was the first step toward something more, toward healing, toward rebuilding the trust that had been lost, not just in the city, but in their own lives. The morning after the press conference, Maya woke up to the hum of her phone vibrating on the bedside table. She had barely slept, her mind still reeling from the weight of her words. the responsibility now firmly on her shoulders. The fight for justice had been long, but it was far from over. There was still so much left to do, so many bridges to rebuild, so many wounds to heal. The city had heard her words, but the true test would come in the days, weeks, and months to follow. Her phone buzzed again. Jasmine. Maya, we've got a problem. Jasmine's voice was tight with urgency. The public is on your side, but the department is starting to fracture. I've been hearing whispers. Officers are scared, confused. There are factions forming. Maya rubbed her eyes, feeling the exhaustion in every muscle. What do you mean, factions? There are still those loyal to Ethan King, Jasmine explained. And now they're not just sitting back, they're actively undermining you. They want you out. Maya gripped the edge of the bed, her fingers digging into the sheets. She had known this wouldn't be easy, but hearing it from Jasmine made it real. What do we do? We need to act fast. The longer we wait, the more they'll consolidate their power. You've got to show the department that you're not backing down. You need a plan, and you need it now. Maya took a deep breath. She couldn't afford to hesitate. She couldn't let fear dictate her next move. Get me the details. We'll fix this. I'm not going anywhere. Later that day, Maya stood in front of the department, the atmosphere thick with uncertainty. The officers who had once supported her were now looking at her with caution, some with outright distrust. She had known it wouldn't be easy to rebuild, but the cracks were now visible, spreading faster than she had anticipated. She could see the divisions forming, the lines being drawn between those loyal to her and those who still believed in the old order. The King family's influence ran deep, and eradicating it wasn't going to be done in a day. Maya stepped up to the front, her gaze sweeping over the crowd. There were no familiar faces in this room anymore, only people she had to lead, people whose loyalty was still in question. This wasn't just a matter of policy or legal battles anymore. It was a matter of trust. It was a matter of proving that they could believe in her again. Listen up, Maya's voice cut through the murmurs of the room, calm but firm. I know some of you are worried. You're scared. You don't know what's coming next, and that's okay. This is uncharted territory for all of us. But I need you to listen to me right now. We are not backing down. Not now, not ever. We're going to rebuild this department, but we're going to do it together. She let her words sink in, the silence stretching between them. I've had to make some hard decisions. I've lost people I trusted. But I will not apologize for seeking justice. I will not apologize for putting the people of Jackson first. And if you're here to fight that, if you're here to keep the system that failed us in place, then you need to step aside. A murmur rippled through the room. Some of the officers shifted uncomfortably, glancing at each other. Maya knew this wasn't going to be an easy sell, but it was her only option. She had to show them that she wasn't afraid to stand firm. Those who stand with me, those who want to help rebuild this department, to make Jackson a city we can be proud of again, you are welcome. But we don't have time for anyone who's still trying to hold on to the past. We will fight for what's right, or we will not fight at all. That evening, Maya returned home, her mind still heavy with the weight of the day. Michael was waiting for her in the kitchen, his back to her as he stirred something on the stove. He hadn't said much lately, and every time they spoke, it felt like they were both holding back. The distance between them had only grown since the truth had been revealed. How did it go? Michael asked quietly, not turning to face her. Maya hesitated, unsure of how to answer. It's complicated, she said, her voice strained. The department is divided. I don't know if I can trust half of the people I'm working with. Michael turned to face her, his expression unreadable. And what about us? What's the plan for us, Maya? You've been so focused on fixing everything else that I'm not sure you even know what's left of us. The words hit her harder than she expected. She had been so consumed by the work, by the fight for justice, that she had neglected everything else, including the man who had been by her side through it all. I'm sorry, Michael, Maya whispered. I've been so lost in the fight that I forgot what really matters. Michael stepped closer, his hand gently cupping her cheek. You're not alone in this, Maya, but we need to face it together. The road ahead is long. We can't rebuild everything in a day, but if you're going to make this work, you have to make time for us, for what we have, or you'll lose it all. Maya closed her eyes, feeling the weight of his words. She had spent so much time fighting for the truth, fighting for change, that she had forgotten what it meant to hold on to the things that mattered most. I'll fix this, she said softly, meeting his gaze. But I can't do it alone. Michael nodded, a small but meaningful smile tugging at his lips. Then let's do it together. The days following that conversation were a blur. Maya had never felt so drained, but she also felt a renewed sense of purpose. She knew the road ahead would be long and filled with challenges, but for the first time in weeks, she felt like she had the strength to face it. The battle for justice wasn't just about exposing corruption. It was about rebuilding the trust that had been shattered, not just within the department, but in her own life. She had a long road ahead, but she was no longer walking it alone. Maya stood in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection, her hands still shaking slightly. The city had watched her every move since the truth came to light. The battle she had fought was far from over, but the first step toward rebuilding, both the department and herself, had been made. She had faced the lies, the corruption, and the betrayals, and now she had to step forward, ready to face whatever came next. Her phone buzzed on the counter. Jasmine. Maya answered, her voice steady but carrying the weight of everything she had been through. What's the situation? We've got some good news, Jasmine replied, her voice filled with a rare tone of optimism. The mayor's office is backing you up. The investigation into Ethan and his father is gaining traction. We've got enough support from the public and the media to keep pushing forward, but there's still a lot to be done. Maya allowed herself a small smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. That's good, but I know there's still work to do. Yeah, Jasmine said, the gravity of the situation still present in her voice. The department's still fractured. Some officers are still loyal to Ethan's side, but we're making progress. Slowly. Maya took a deep breath. She had known this wouldn't be easy, but the road ahead seemed even longer now. The trust that had been shattered in the department, the years of corruption that had embedded themselves into every layer of the force, weren't going to be fixed overnight. Rebuilding the system was a monumental task, and Maya couldn't do it alone. She looked at herself in the mirror one more time, silently reaffirming the commitment she had made. This fight wasn't just about the department or the city anymore. It was about who she had become in the process. She had chosen this path, and now she had to see it through. Later that afternoon, Maya gathered with her team in the conference room, her eyes scanning the faces of the officers who were still standing by her side. They had fought through the darkness, but the light at the end of the tunnel was still distant. The question that had loomed over them since the beginning remained. Could they rebuild? Could they earn the trust of the people and restore the reputation of the police department? Listen, Maya began, her voice steady but filled with resolve. I know things aren't perfect. I know that many of you are uncertain, and rightfully so. We've been through a lot, but we have a choice now. We can either walk away and let this system continue to fail the people of Jackson, or we can stand together and fight for the change that's needed. She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of her officers. Some looked hesitant, others determined. But the truth was clear. This was the beginning of something bigger than any one of them. This was the start of rebuilding what had been broken, both in the department and in themselves. We're not just cleaning up a few bad apples, Maya continued, her voice gaining strength. We're changing the entire system. This will take time, but it's time we have to take. I'm asking for your trust, the same trust you've always given me, and the same trust you deserve from me. Together, we can build something that works, something that's fair and just for everyone. But it starts with us, here today. There was a silence that followed her words, the weight of the responsibility sinking in. But after a moment, Officer Foster, one of the older and more experienced officers, stood up. His eyes were clear, his voice firm. I'm with you, Chief, Henry said, his words steady. We all are. It's time to fix this. The room shifted, and one by one, other officers stood, their faces filled with a mix of determination and hope. Maya felt a surge of gratitude for them, for their willingness to believe in the possibility of change, but she also knew this was just the beginning. They had to show the city that this department could be trusted again, that they could do what was right, not just what was easy. Thank you, Maya said, her voice quiet but sincere. We're not just rebuilding the department, we're rebuilding trust, and trust isn't something that's given easily. It has to be earned, day by day, action by action. As the meeting ended and the officers filed out, Maya felt a sense of cautious optimism settle over her. There was still so much to do, so many challenges to face, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she wasn't fighting alone. That evening, Maya and Michael sat together on the couch, a quiet calm settling between them. The weight of the day had left them both exhausted, but there was something different in the air now. It wasn't the heavy, oppressive tension that had clouded their relationship for weeks. It was a sense of renewal, a quiet understanding that despite everything, they had made it through. You were right, Maya said softly, her head resting on Michael's shoulder. "I've been so focused on the fight that I forgot about us. But I'm here now. I'm ready to do this together." Michael turned to her, his hand gently lifting her chin so that their eyes met. "We've always been in this together, Maya. I just need you to be here. Really here. The rest will come." She smiled, her heart lighter than it had been in weeks. "Together," she whispered. "We'll do this together." For the first time in a long while, Maya felt a sense of peace settle in her heart. The fight for justice was far from over, but the road ahead didn't feel as daunting as it once had. They were no longer standing alone. They were standing together, ready to face whatever came next. The next morning, Maya stood on the steps of the police headquarters, the sun rising behind her. The city was watching. The world was watching. But now, for the first time, Maya felt ready to face it all. The road ahead was long, and there would be obstacles at every turn. But with each step, she knew they were on the path to something greater, a new beginning for the department, the city, and for herself. Maya sat in her office late into the evening, the weight of the past few months pressing on her like a physical force. The department was still in turmoil, the road to rebuilding trust seeming longer with each passing day. She had made progress, yes, but the true cost of justice was becoming clearer, not just in terms of the battles she had fought, but in the toll it was taking on her personal life, on her marriage, and on the very foundation of what she had once believed. The truth had been exposed. The corrupt system had been shaken to its core, but power didn't let go easily. It fought back, and Maya had known from the beginning that power would come at a cost. The question was she willing to pay it? Her phone buzzed. Henry. She answered it quickly, not wanting to waste time on pleasantries. "What's going on?" Maya could hear the strain in Henry's voice. "We've got a situation. A few of the officers we've been trying to reach, the ones who were loyal to the Kings, they've gone underground. We're hearing whispers that Richard King has been making moves to undermine you. He's trying to rally support from the outside. It's escalating fast." Maya closed her eyes, rubbing her temples. She had expected retaliation, but it wasn't just coming from within the department anymore. Richard King, the puppet master who had controlled the city for years, was now trying to regroup, and his grip on power wasn't as weak as she had hoped. "How bad is it?" she asked, her voice steady despite the sinking feeling in her stomach. "It's bad, Maya," Henry replied, his voice laced with urgency. "We're talking about a full-on fight now. We're not just cleaning up the department anymore. Richard's made sure of that. If we don't act quickly, he'll regain control, and the changes we've made will be for nothing." Maya stood up from her desk, her heart racing. This wasn't just a political battle anymore. This wasn't about righting wrongs in the police department. This was about survival. She had made it this far, but now she had to decide what she was willing to sacrifice to win. "I'll handle it," Maya said, her voice unwavering. "Make sure the team is ready. We need to take him down, once and for all." The next day, Maya found herself at the heart of a meeting with key members of her team. The atmosphere was tense, the officers' faces grim as they discussed the next steps. Everyone knew what was at stake now. Richard King wasn't just a corrupt politician anymore. He was an enemy that would stop at nothing to hold on to his power. And Maya knew that if they were going to take him down, they couldn't afford to hesitate. "We need to hit them where it hurts," Maya said, her voice commanding. "We've got the evidence, and we've got the support of the public. But we need to be strategic. We need to hit their finances, their connections, everything they've been using to hold on to power." Her team nodded, but there was an underlying sense of unease. They had already faced so much, and now the stakes were higher than ever. Maya could see the fear in their eyes, the same fear she felt deep inside herself, but she couldn't afford to let them see it. She couldn't afford to back down. "The King family has too many resources, too many allies. They'll fight back with everything they've got," Henry said, his voice low, "and we don't know how far they'll go." Maya met his gaze, her resolve hardening. "I know, but we can't let that stop us. If we do nothing, they win. If we give in to fear, they'll control this city forever." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in. The room was silent, the officers processing what was being asked of them. Maya knew that the battle ahead would be long, and not everyone would make it through unscathed. But she was willing to pay that price, because she knew, deep down, that if she didn't, the system would never change. "Get ready," she said, her voice steady. "We're taking them down." Later that evening, as Maya walked through the now empty halls of the department, the weight of her decisions hung heavily on her shoulders. She had made promises, to the people of Jackson, to her team, to herself. But she knew that the cost of keeping those promises wasn't something that could be measured in simple terms. The power she had fought for, the justice she had worked so hard to achieve, was beginning to feel like a heavy mantle. She paused outside the door to her office and took a deep breath before stepping inside. Michael was there, sitting in his usual spot by the window, staring out into the city. The silence between them was thick, the unspoken words hanging in the air. She had been so consumed by the fight for justice that she had neglected the person who had been her anchor. Michael didn't look up as she entered. His voice was quiet when he finally spoke. "How's it going?" "We're fighting a war now," Maya replied, her voice soft but resolute. "Richard's not going down easily, but we're making progress." Michael finally turned to look at her, his eyes filled with concern. "What's the cost of all this, Maya? What are you willing to lose?" Maya stood there, her chest tight. She had always known the cost of power, the price of justice. But now, with Michael's question hanging in the air, it felt more real than ever. The weight of the responsibility, the toll it was taking on her marriage, on her soul. She felt it all. "I don't know if I can keep doing this," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know if I can keep paying the price." Michael stood up and walked over to her, his hands resting gently on her shoulders. "We'll figure it out together. Whatever happens, we'll face it together." Maya looked into his eyes, the overwhelming weight of the situation threatening to swallow her whole. But in that moment, she realized something. She didn't have to face this alone. The road ahead was long, but she had someone by her side who was willing to walk it with her. "I'll fight for what's right," Maya whispered, "but I won't lose us in the process." As Maya walked out of the department later that night, the weight of her decision still pressing on her, she felt a quiet determination settle in her chest. The battle wasn't over, and the price of power was steep, but she had made her choice, and she was ready to pay whatever it took to see it through.